It all began on a crisp autumn morning in Tallahassee, Florida, when Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of the state, arrived at court for a highly anticipated hearing. Bondi, who had built a reputation for her no-nonsense approach to law, was a familiar face in the courtroom. She was known not only for her legal acumen but also for her personal style. But on this day, her choice of accessory would ignite an unexpected storm. As she entered the courtroom, the judge, a stern, conservative man named Judge Harold Fitch, noticed something that made his blood boil. Bondi was wearing a large silver cross necklace that hung prominently around her neck. To some, it was just a simple religious symbol, to others, it was a political statement. Judge Fitch, however, saw it as something much more insidious, an overt sign of religious influence on the legal process. Without missing a beat, Judge Fitch called Bondi to the front and issued a fine. His reasoning was that the display of religious symbols in the courtroom violated the principle of judicial impartiality. It was, in his view, an inappropriate gesture for a legal professional, regardless of personal beliefs. Bondi, taken aback, tried to maintain her composure. She was no stranger to controversy, but this felt different. The fine was not just about her choice of jewelry, it was about her reputation, her principles, and the very foundations of her career. But as the hearing progressed, it became clear that there was more at play than a mere clash of personal beliefs. Pam Bondi, undeterred by the unexpected fine, immediately prepared to challenge the judge's decision. She had spent years navigating the intricate legal landscape of Florida, dealing with everything from high-profile criminal cases to complex civil disputes. This, however, was personal, a matter of principle. Her legal team quickly went to work, drafting a motion for the fine to be dismissed. The argument they put forward was a sharp one: Judge Fitch had overstepped his bounds. The Constitution granted individuals the right to freely express their religious beliefs, and that right extended to the courtroom. Bondi had worn the cross not as a political statement, but as an expression of her personal faith, something protected by the very legal framework that Judge Fitch had sworn to uphold. As the case moved to the appellate court, the public began to take notice. The media quickly latched onto the story, framing it as a battle between religious freedom and judicial authority. Opinion pieces were written, with some supporting Bondi and others decrying her actions as an attempt to politicize the legal system. The controversy was gaining momentum, and soon, the entire state was divided. What no one expected, however, was how Bondi would approach the upcoming legal arguments. Known for her quick wit and sharp mind, she was preparing not only to defend her actions but to deliver a legal argument that would leave Judge Fitch and the court stunned. Bondi's strategy was simple: use the very legal principles that Judge Fitch had invoked to show how his ruling was not only unconstitutional but also a failure of judicial reasoning. It was a bold move, and it would soon become clear that Pam Bondi was not just a former attorney general with political clout, she was a legal genius. The courtroom was packed the day Pam Bondi took the stand. The media had turned out in full force, eager to capture every moment of the unfolding drama. She stood before the appellate court, poised and confident, as the three judges prepared to hear her argument. Judge Fitch's ruling had been controversial, but what Bondi was about to present would completely change the trajectory of the case. She opened with a calm, measured tone. "Your Honors," she began, "this case is not just about the right to wear a piece of jewelry. This is about the very principles that govern our legal system, the balance between personal rights and judicial impartiality." Bondi's argument was sophisticated, referencing not only the First Amendment but also the deeply rooted history of religious freedom in the United States. She pointed to numerous precedents where personal expression, even within a professional setting, had been protected. What Judge Fitch failed to understand, she continued, was that the Constitution does not only protect freedom of religion in private, it protects it in every aspect of our lives, including the public sphere. The judges listened intently as Bondi expertly dismantled the logic behind Judge Fitch's ruling. She invoked landmark Supreme Court cases and interpreted them in a way that even the most skeptical legal minds in the courtroom couldn't ignore. Bondi had done her homework, and it was clear that she had studied the nuances of constitutional law like few others. But it wasn't just her knowledge of the law that impressed the judges, it was the way she used her argument to challenge the very premise of the fine. She argued that the fine itself was a form of government overreach, an infringement on her right to freely express her faith. She likened it to a form of censorship, arguing that religious symbols, like any other form of personal expression, should not be penalized in a public setting unless there was clear evidence of harm to others. When she finished her argument, the courtroom was silent. The judges exchanged glances, impressed by the depth of her legal analysis and the strength of her position. Judge Fitch, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, clearly uncomfortable with the mounting pressure, knew he was facing a formidable opponent. It was becoming clear that Bondi wasn't just a political figure, she was a legal force to be reckoned with. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the three appellate judges deliberated in silence. Bondi had made a powerful case, and her legal brilliance had stunned even those who had initially been skeptical of her argument. As the judges returned to their seats, the presiding judge, Judge Ellis, cleared his throat. "We have listened carefully to both sides," Judge Ellis began, his voice steady, but with a note of uncertainty. "The issue at hand, while seemingly trivial on the surface, touches upon some deeply held constitutional principles. The right to express one's religious beliefs is, indeed, fundamental." Bondi's legal team exchanged glances, knowing that this was the pivotal moment. The atmosphere in the room was thick with anticipation. The judges would either uphold Judge Fitch's fine or reverse it, potentially setting a precedent that would shape the future of religious expression in public and private spaces. Judge Ellis continued, "That said, this court must also consider the integrity of our legal institutions. We must ask ourselves, does the presence of a religious symbol in the courtroom harm the sanctity of the legal process?" The room held its breath. "As much as we respect the importance of judicial impartiality," Judge Ellis said, his tone now more contemplative, "we must acknowledge that in this case, there is no evidence that the wearing of a cross has had any negative impact on the proceedings. This is a personal expression of faith, and as such, it is entitled to protection under the First Amendment." The other judges nodded in agreement, and Judge Ellis turned to Bondi. "Mrs. Bondi," he said, "you have presented a compelling case. We find that the fine issued by Judge Fitch was indeed an overreach and a violation of your constitutional rights." The ruling was a triumph. Bondi had not only won the case but had effectively turned the tables on her critics. The media erupted with coverage of her victory, praising her for her legal genius and her unyielding defense of constitutional principles. Judge Fitch, meanwhile, was left to face the fallout of his controversial decision. His credibility had taken a serious hit, and many legal experts began to question his judgment and motivations. But for Bondi, the victory was more than just a legal win, it was a personal vindication. She had proven that her knowledge of the law could not be underestimated. As she left the courtroom that day, Bondi felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The fine had been overturned, but more importantly, she had reaffirmed the importance of protecting individual freedoms, no matter the cost. The news of Pam Bondi's victory quickly spread beyond Florida's borders. Headlines across the country praised her legal prowess, with many hailing her as a fearless defender of the Constitution. The case had struck a chord with people who believed in religious freedom, but it had also stirred up a wave of debate about the separation of church and state, especially within the context of legal proceedings. For Bondi, the attention was overwhelming at times. Interviews, press conferences, and public appearances followed one after another. She was invited to speak on major news outlets, where her poised yet unflinching responses solidified her place as a respected voice in the legal world. She became a symbol of how the law could be used as a tool for personal conviction, while still adhering to constitutional values. Yet, the victory came with its own set of challenges. While many admired her, there were also those who resented what they saw as an attempt to blur the lines between religion and law. Some legal scholars argued that her victory set a dangerous precedent, opening the door for more religious symbols in public institutions, while others warned that it could lead to more political manipulation of the judiciary. Judge Fitch, who had been a central figure in the case, found himself embroiled in controversy. Legal professionals across the country questioned his judgment, and his decision to fine Bondi was scrutinized as an overzealous attempt to enforce judicial neutrality. Some saw him as a victim of Bondi's political influence, while others believed he had simply misinterpreted the law. The public reaction was divided, but Bondi had no intention of backing down. She continued to push for a broader conversation about the rights of individuals to express their personal beliefs in the public sphere, without fear of government interference. Her legal career, already impressive, had now gained a new dimension. As she reflected on the case, Bondi realized that it wasn't just about wearing a cross in the courtroom. It was about the fundamental freedoms that defined America, the right to express oneself, to live according to one's beliefs, and to have those beliefs respected in every arena of life, including the courtroom. Her victory in court was only the beginning of a much larger conversation, one that would continue to shape the landscape of American law for years to come. Pam Bondi had proven that she was more than just a political figure. She was a legal strategist who could fight and win battles that transcended partisan lines. In a world full of legal complexities, Bondi had shown that even the most personal of symbols could become a powerful weapon in the fight for constitutional rights. As time passed, the case continued to reverberate across the legal community. Pam Bondi's victory over Judge Fitch's fine had far-reaching implications, not only for her career but for the larger discourse surrounding the intersection of law, religion, and personal rights. Bondi found herself increasingly in demand, sought after by think tanks, law schools, and political organizations. Her reputation as a sharp legal mind who could deftly navigate complex issues had reached new heights. Her arguments in the case were now cited in law journals and legal textbooks, and her defense of religious freedom became a rallying cry for those concerned about government overreach. Though she had earned admiration from a wide range of people, the story was far from over. The legal world, ever evolving, saw a constant battle for influence and perspective. The case had stirred the pot, with factions forming around what it truly meant to defend the separation of church and state, as well as where religious expression should have a place in the public sphere. Bondi, ever pragmatic, took these debates in stride, but she never wavered in her belief that personal freedoms should be protected, particularly when it came to something as fundamental as the freedom to practice one's faith. Meanwhile, her critics were not silent. Judge Fitch, though publicly silent, began to find himself on the receiving end of professional consequences. His reputation had suffered, and he faced scrutiny from within the legal community. Legal experts debated whether his overreach had been a result of personal bias or a misguided attempt at enforcing judicial neutrality. His decision had become a cautionary tale, illustrating the dangers of allowing personal opinions to influence legal decisions. For Bondi, however, the battle was not just about one case, it was about setting a precedent for the future. She had always believed that the law was a powerful tool to safeguard individual rights, but her newfound platform allowed her to advocate for more than just religious freedom. She became an advocate for transparency in the judicial system, arguing that decisions like Judge Fitch's fine could not be left unchecked, and that the public needed to know when judicial overreach was happening. Her rise as a legal advocate also led her to consider future political opportunities. Despite her success, she knew that her influence extended far beyond the courtroom. She began to speak more openly about the future of American democracy, often addressing issues of accountability, the separation of powers, and the need for more comprehensive protections for civil liberties. One day, as she sat in her office reflecting on the events that had brought her here, Bondi found herself smiling at the irony of it all. A simple piece of jewelry, a cross, had ignited a firestorm, and in the end, it had led to the greatest legal victory of her career. But she wasn't content with just one victory. There were more battles to be fought, and more principles to defend. Pam Bondi had already shown the world that she was a legal force to be reckoned with, but the journey was far from over. This case, while pivotal, was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life, a chapter where her legal genius would continue to shape the future of law and freedom in America. Months passed, and Pam Bondi's name became synonymous with legal integrity and the defense of personal freedoms. Her victory had launched her into a new realm of influence, one that stretched beyond the courtroom. The case had sparked conversations across the country about the role of religion in public life, the boundaries of judicial power, and the rights of individuals to express their beliefs without fear of retribution. But Bondi, ever the strategist, knew that a legal victory was only a step in a much larger journey. Her growing influence began to challenge the status quo. As she continued to speak out on issues of constitutional rights, civil liberties, and judicial transparency, she found herself at the center of national discussions. Her stance on defending religious expression in the public sphere earned her both admiration and disdain from different political factions, but she refused to be swayed by the polarized opinions of others. She knew that the fight for individual rights was not a partisan issue, but one that transcended political divides. Despite her newfound fame, Bondi's attention remained focused on the future. In the wake of her legal victory, she began to lay the groundwork for larger reforms in the judicial system. She called for more oversight of judges' decisions, arguing that accountability was vital to prevent further overreach, like the fine that had sparked her case. Her advocacy for the separation of church and state, along with the protection of personal freedoms, led her to speak at universities, legal forums, and even international conferences, where her voice was heard by legal minds from across the world. But just as Bondi's star continued to rise, new challenges began to emerge. As her influence grew, she found herself being courted by political groups who saw her as a potential leader in the fight for conservative values. While she appreciated the support, Bondi remained resolute in her belief that the law should be a force for justice, not a tool for political manipulation. She faced increasing pressure to align herself with a political party, but she refused to let her principles be compromised by partisanship. It was during one of her speeches at a legal conference, where she was addressing a packed room of young law students, that Bondi realized the full extent of her journey. She had come a long way from the day Judge Fitch had issued the fine. What had started as a personal affront had evolved into a nationwide conversation about the importance of judicial impartiality, religious freedom, and the protection of individual rights. She had become a symbol of the very ideals she had fought to protect. In her closing remarks that day, Bondi spoke not just about the law, but about the importance of standing up for one's beliefs, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. The law, she said, is not just a set of rules. It is a reflection of our values, our freedoms, and our commitment to justice. And while we may face moments of challenge, it is in those moments that we find the true strength of our legal system. As she left the podium, the applause was deafening. Bondi knew that her journey had only just begun, and that her legal genius, combined with her unwavering commitment to justice, would continue to inspire future generations of lawyers, judges, and citizens. Pam Bondi had proven that a single act of defiance, whether it be wearing a cross in a courtroom or defending an individual's right to religious expression, could reverberate throughout the entire legal system. Her story, a tale of courage, principle, and legal brilliance, would be remembered not only for the case she had won, but for the way she had redefined the role of law in protecting the fundamental freedoms of every American. And as the final chapter of this story closed, one truth remained clear: Pam Bondi's fight for justice was far from over.